You're live.
Okay, welcome, folks. This is Justice Oversight Committee. This is December 17th, and this is the last of our 6 meetings for off session. And so today we're really just going to be focusing on tying up loose ends. And as we begin to tie up our loose ends, I think we need to bring Ben up. Ben is good at organizing everything for us.
No, you were saying Ben was a loose end.
No, it's not a loose end.
Oh, that was going too.
It's still working. So we're going to go through just seeing what reports have been due to us. Doesn't mean that we have to act on the reports, but we do have some recommendations that we want to make to some of the standing committees in both the House and the Senate. And Ben's going to go through a draft letter that he has put together, and we'll probably have to change it a little bit here and there. And then this afternoon, we finalize it. You know, so today it's really getting ACH report, talking about that, as well as the juvenile facility update to really do a deeper dive in that. And then we had set aside today for both the SCA as well as the Department of Corrections to come back with us after brainstorming sessions, not together, but independently in terms of what each entity would recommend for recruitment and retention of DOC staff. And that would be staff within our correctional facilities as well as possibly staff within our field offices. So we wanted to do that together this afternoon, but the SCA had a conflict in the afternoon, so they're going to be doing it this morning, and DOC will do it this afternoon for that. And we could switch DOC to the morning because the commissioner is tied up, and that could not be changed. So we did a lot of adjustment in our So Ben, are you ready?
Yeah, I'm just,
Still working.
I'm always working, you know that. But I'm just connecting to Zoom now, so I can share my screen for the letter
Okay.
momentarily. But in the meantime, good morning, everybody. Welcome to the final Justice Oversight meeting of the 2024 interim. As you all know, my name is Ben Novogratski from the Office of Legislative Counsel, and as Chair Emmons.
Whoops. I know the audio. Audio. And it's to turn it off.
Better. So, and as Chair Emmons noted, I'll be going through a draft recommendation letter from the committee to the pro tem and to the speaker, requesting that they consult with the committees of jurisdiction to take up certain topics. And then I think also, Chairman, do you want me to briefly go over the Coordinated Justice Reform Advisory recommendation as well?
Because that's connected to our Justice Reinvestment too. Correct?
Mm-hmm.
And as a reminder, there is a line item for Justice Reinvestment 2, Justice Reinvestment in our state budget. And a portion of that line item, about $900,000 each year, gets targeted to Justice Reinvestment 2 initiatives. That's the goal. It's DOC that sort of decides where the dollars go. It goes through this other little process of a little committee.
Yeah, I can go over it if you'd like.
But there isn't any legislative action that needs to be correct.
Only on the budget.
Only on the budgets. That's why we have Trevor here and Senator Burworth.
So which order would you like me to take it up in?
Whatever works the best for you.
Well, I have the draft letter pulled up, so
Okay.
let's start there. And I will just share my screen so everyone can take a look. Okay, so as the community sees, this letter is addressed to Speaker Kowinski and President Pro Tem Baruth, who's also here with us on the committee. So it reads, and this was after consulting Chair Emmons, Vice Chair Lyons, and sort of gathering everything that was discussed over the course of the summer and fall. So as you say, this is during the 2024 legislative interim, the Joint Legislative Justice Oversight Committee identified several issues that need further attention during the upcoming legislative session. With that in mind, the committee respectfully requests that you consult with the appropriate standing committees of jurisdiction to encourage examination of the following topics. One being the status of the forthcoming juvenile facility, specifically the timeline to construct the facility and for it to be operational, including any municipal zoning exceptions that may need to be implemented in exchange for siting the facility at the state's preferred location. Two, examining that the Department of Vermont Health Access operating correctional health care rather than the Department of Corrections contracting with a third-party provider. Three, any appropriations or distribution of state funds needed to ensure broadband access at Department of Corrections facilities. Four, requiring that the Department of Corrections Central Office organize regular meetings with facility superintendents to monitor and quickly address staffing and facility conditions. And five, the Vermont State Employees Association and the Department of Corrections collaborate with the committees overseeing government operations to address staffing and recruiting issues. Then there's a nice little sign off. Sincerely, Representative Emmons on behalf of the committee.
So first off, did we miss anything?
And I might be not remembering everything, but what was the follow-up that was required on the Vine system and the whole reporting, the notification, victim notification?
I mean, there was a separate letter that was drafted with those recommendations.
That's what I couldn't remember.
Mhm.
Okay, so is that already gone?
Mhm.
That's okay, okay.
Last meeting.
Yeah.
Okay, all right, I
That
can,
went to the Judiciary Committee.
Judiciary and to you.
okay, thank you. I just wanted.
And just so everybody knows, I'm sort of holding on to these letters until there's a formal assignment of committee chairs, even though I think for those committees, there's
Okay.
conventional wisdom, but once they've been assigned, the letters will formally go out.
Can I ask a question here?
Yep.
It's Jenny,
Jenny?
yeah. So I'm looking at number one and the juvenile facility, and I'd kind of like to hold off on that number one until we've heard from DC, the buildings, BGS, always get that mixed up, but BGS and DCF about where that is. I do know that Virgins has been making some requests of state government that are not directly related to the placement of the facility itself. And I'm wondering whether we want to get involved with that or not. But I need to ask a question of folks when they come in.
And Senator Lyons, on that point, there was sort of a nod to those requests about the municipal zoning. So I could remove that altogether or change the language, whatever you and the committee chooses.
No, I wouldn't want to change it. I think that that's important because then when it goes to the pro tem and the speaker, and if there's any question about municipal zoning, it could go to other committees of jurisdiction for that discussion. I think it's important. My thinking was this is municipal zoning exemptions related to the building itself, the facility itself. But there are I think there are other things going on, and I don't know whether they're real, not real, what the concerns are. So we'd have to hear from BGS and DCF before making any suggestion of change.
And that's why we're going to revisit this at the end of the day, because we may want to say something for raise the age. We haven't stated anything, but we've got some testimony coming on that. Martin?
Yeah, that was one of the things. I had two items that I thought that we should have included, and one was with respect to number one, it's a little broader than that. It's raise the age. There are several issues that we need to continue to follow up on before April 1st, when the next step of raise the age occurs, including the staffing issues, the IT issues, as well as the facility issues. The second is I think that we should have something in here regarding restorative justice and diversion, because we heard some plans that DOC has. And we've also heard about the pre-charge diversion program and ensuring that that program gets up and running and is appropriately resourced. So I think that that should be added in there.
Mhm. You know, that also triggers for me too, the pretrial supervision piece.
Right.
We only did agree to a pilot project in 2 counties, and that was which counties?
Essex.
Orleans and Essex.
And we asked for a rollout plan, but I think that was in the letter already sent, right?
Yeah.
This is Topper.
Yes, Topper.
I can't remember now whether or not we've already sent this, but there were questions about medication and people getting the proper medication at the proper time in the facility, and also when they were getting out, to make sure that they were taken care of. I think it was for 30 days or something like that.
Topper, we went through what's current statute for that. I don't think there was any recommendation or thoughts. I think it's centered around, should we provide healthcare within our correctional facility with our own department and not contract that out with WellPath or any third party? So
Yeah.
that's our number 2.
Yeah, I remember that, but there was also an immediate problem within the facility where people, at least my memory was, people told us that they were not getting the proper medication. Not all of them, but some people weren't. And they were WellPath was gonna follow up on it, but I don't remember it being solved. I remember the commissioner saying, we'll take care of that, but I've never heard anything that said it's all been taken care of. We had extensive conversations about when people were leaving the facility to make sure that they had something in their hand where they could get the medicine they needed until they could get settled.
Trevor?
Yeah, this was related to the change we had in the 1115 waiver.
Yeah.
Like that. So I think that's what we're referring to. And
Yes.
That's moving forward, correct?
Yep. Yep.
And
Yep. Good point, Trevor. That's exactly right. I don't know whether we need to put it in there or not. Why don't we think about it as we go through the rest of the day and then come back to it. We don't want to leave anything out, but I do think it's being covered through the 1115 waiver. I also think that the department is acutely aware of the needs here. Oh,
Something for the committee to consider as we go throughout the day, but maybe adding something along the lines of providing updates on the implementation of the 1115 waiver, something to that effect.
sounds good.
Yeah. You know, it would be good to highlight that because I think in both the House and the Senate, there's going to be such a change in all of these committees that, you know, the Human Services Committee will be looking at the 1115 waiver. Healthcare committee would be
We'll be
both.
looking at it in healthcare, both. And I mean, the issue about, sufficient transition planning, really, it's kind of broader than just medication, but the sufficient transition planning because of the significant number of deaths that have occurred immediately post-discharge from corrections. People with substance use disorder, I think, was an issue that our committee made some recommendations for this committee to take further testimony, which we have. I think it is good to add, for updates about approval and implementation of the changes to the Medicaid program for people in corrections. So
We're going to have so many new people in some of these committees. They're really starting from scratch.
And potential new chairs, so the continuity thing, I think it's probably better to err on the side of mentioning it as opposed to not mentioning it, yeah.
So Representative Wood, do you want to add something about those transitional programs?
For me, I would like to add that, but the committee can decide. It's really transition planning, including medication assisted treatment. It's so for me, it's broad because there's
Yeah, and
there's
Well,
case
yeah.
management program. I was just going to say, we funded with the opioid settlement fund, some transit, I don't know if we call it service coordination, case management, but it's sort of like, we expanded the program that had gotten started as a pilot. And, so I just think it's important for committees to, go back and continue, sort of our oversight of implementation of these things that have already been funded and things that are in the process of change, essentially. So,
Jenny?
Yeah, so I think that's a really good idea. Commenting on transitional planning overall. I mean, it does get into transitional housing. It gets into medicated treated assistance treatment. It gets into a lot of different areas. So I think I don't think we need to cover all of the areas, but I think saying something about including treatment and housing might be helpful.
Ben has got it. He's writing it down. Anything else? So what is written right now, is that all right for folks? Does that work for folks? So at least Ben doesn't have to do any adjustments on that.
Exception of one, maybe, right?
Right.
Yeah, so. That's a placeholder for the time being.
Reports, anything else there, Ben?
Nothing on this. I can make some changes during the lunch hour and then we can review it, at the end of the meeting for final revisions. And then as far as the Coordinated Justice Reform Advisory Council, which came out of Section 2 of Act 40 of 2023. So this council was directed to do a few things, recommend to the Commissioner of Corrections a new appropriate allocation of not more than $900,000 from the Justice Reinvestment 2 line item of DOC's budget for the upcoming fiscal year to support community-based programs and services related to data collection and analysis capacity and other initiatives. Then also to submit that recommendation to this committee. And then to include it in its report, the efforts it's made to consult with organizations that that it needs to partner with. But the overall reason to be, if you will, of this council was to be the next iteration of Justice Reinvestment 2, to take the torch over from the Council of State Governments, which was sort of the point entity, so to speak, for this, to establish it within the state so that all the players within the criminal justice system could essentially assess and make recommendations about what the next chapter for justice reform should be, if any. And so, as it said, it was created to establish a unified and collaborative state approach to support state and local community-based programs and services that are consistent with Vermont's restorative justice policy. And they needed to consult with state and local partners using a data-driven approach, improving public safety, reducing correctional and criminal justice spending, and reinvest savings or redirect funding in strategies that foster desistance or decrease crime, delinquencies, and recidivism. So that's sort of the overall charge of the committee, if you will. And then as a reminder, those on the council are Willa Farrell from the Office of the Attorney General, Chief Judge Zone from the Superior Courts, Commissioner Demmel of DOC, Lindy Boudreau from DCF, Jennifer Pullman from the Center for Crime Victim Services, Monica Weber, who's the Executive Director at the Vermont Statistical Analysis Center. She also, they also authored the investment and trends report that came out last month. Susanna Davis the Director of the Office of Racial Equity, Representative Squirrel, and Senator Hashim, were all the members of the committee. They met a few times in February, April, August, October, and November of last year. And they made a final recommendation for the recommended appropriation of $490,952 to be inserted into the JR2 line item for DOC. And that would be divided between $131,084 to the Vermont Network and $359,868 to support community justice centers. They also did have a final recommendation as far as the future of the council, which is set to sunset in 2028, but they are requesting that the council be repealed this upcoming session. The reason was that the council notes a JR2 initiative guided by the CSG originally aimed to reinvest dollars from unused out-of-state DOC beds back into policy solutions to reduce incarceration. Basically, they said that depending on the annual census of out-of-state facilities, these savings range from a few $100s into the millions, and the variability created issues for recipients who relied on the funding, particularly as one-time dollars were used for cost of living adjustments and personnel costs. So the council, our lawmakers created the JR2 annual appropriation. But given the now relatively low dollar amounts, since we said up to 900,000, but they really are floating between just below $500,000, they thought that it was a better view that the state and its taxpayers be better served by dedicating the remaining JR2 funds in FY26 and future years as base funding, rather than it sort of being singled out and recommended. And so as a result of that, they don't think that their existence is necessary given the small amount and their recommendation. But I would like to remind this committee that part of, again, as I said before, part of the discussion when the council was formed was to be the next chapter, not just to recommend appropriations. It was to recommend policies as well. So there is a little bit of I think a disconnect between what the legislature's intent was and sort of how it's being framed in this recommendation.
Well, I think this deserves a little more conversation. I just got to note that DCF does have a hard stop at 11 in terms of raise the age, so I'm sure we give them enough time. Trevor, do you want to weigh in at all on this?
Yeah, I was a member of the committee. I didn't drive the committee and participated in the conversation. Just by way of explanation, when we transitioned state bed savings as a way to fund this, we agreed to set up a specific dollar amount. Essentially, it was 900,000. Subsequent to that, although it said at the same time in the letter, it was actually subsequent to that, some decisions were made along the way, both in Senate Judiciary and also in conversations, I think, in the Senate Appropriations Committee. One of them was 300,000 of that 900 was put into the Vermont Network base. Okay. That was a couple of years ago. And then 2 years ago, also, there was a decision made to take 108,000, which is referenced in this letter, and with a change to the 1115 waiver, the barge program, which is the juvenile program in DCF, had the opportunity to match Medicaid dollars with general fund dollars. So the $108,000 was requested to move to DCF so that they could draw down Medicaid funds, which actually ended up with $250,000 to fund the program. So that it seemed like it made sense. Maybe that wasn't the right place to do that, but that's what happened. So effectively what it did is it reduced the 900,000 to the 490,000, which the committee had to work with to make a recommendation. One of the biggest conversations we had in the committee around sort of policy side of that, or speaking to issues around justice reinvestment. Two was we got off talking about, well, how are a lot of these programs, particularly in the criminal justice space, funded? A lot of them funded through special funds. And I think we've all heard enough, both in this committee and elsewhere, how they're not sustainable, typically, not predictable. And we're using these funds to say, this is how you're going to run your program. And the committee had a long conversation that this is not how we should be funding these programs, okay? If policy-wise, you want to assess fees and fines to, because it has some policy connection, okay? That's fine. But the committee felt that that money should flow to the general fund and the program should be adequately funded, specifically with general fund dollars to sustain that program, if that's the program we do, and not be beholden to whatever falls into the special fund. So that's the charge in this letter that comes back to here to go out to committees of jurisdiction. Now that, to make that move, if anyone's ever seen the special fund report that comes out from the administration, it's literally almost 10 pages long. And we fund a lot of things with special funds. So to make a change in that environment is a huge lift because of all the statutory connections, things like that. So in theory, I think it makes a lot of sense to say, oh, let the money go to the general fund, that's fine. But let's take a hard look at all the programs and activities that are actually being funded through these special funds. And let's make sure that they're sustainable and predictable. So that's where that's coming from. The committee had, if I may, and then the committee, there's a lot of power sitting around that table in that committee. And they felt like they were utilizing a lot of their time and energy to be in that committee. And it felt like
It's a waste of time.
it's a waste of time. That's a good way to put it. I wouldn't call it a waste of time. It's not a waste of time, but there are better uses of our time. And that's why the recommendation was made by the committee to sunset the group. And probably have committees of jurisdiction like health district, maybe take another look at how we want to move restorative justice and justice reinvestment forward.
Right.
I have various thoughts about this, but can we push that off to 2:15? So
Yeah, because I want to
because
share time
yeah.
for raise the age.
I don't want to rush.
Right. So the concept of justice reinvestment was, if we did these initiatives, would translate into bed savings on DOC's end, which those savings that resulted from bed savings could be then reinvested into these support systems. That was, in theory, the thinking. Every time we've done it, it works for a year or two and then it falls. So that's sort of where we are. But this afternoon, we've got Monica Weaver in here to talk about the data for the justice reinvestment. So we will hold off. Are there any other reports that you can talk to us this afternoon about?
I mean, there were a handful that were submitted, but the big, the raise the age, the one I just reviewed, one that Monica Weaver will review. And then there was one other that escapes me at the moment that I can summarize.
But there was one other.
I think it was the automatic sealing. Is that the one?
Was it ceiling, expunge ceiling? So let's shift gears. I take it that the DCF folks are in the waiting. Let's let them in. Okay, so I don't know who's ready to go first. I know we're running a little late and you have a hard stop at 11 o'clock. So we do have the deputy commissioner, as well as the adolescent services director. And we have the juvenile justice director. So I'm going to leave it up to you three to figure out who goes first. Raise the age and welcome.
Hello, everybody. I'll go first. I'll just speak briefly and then turn it over to Tyler Allen and Lindy Boudreau. So good morning. My name is Erica Radke, and I am the Deputy Commissioner of the Family Services Division. I'm really happy to be here, Madam Chair and members of the committee, to give you an update this morning about Raise the Age. As you may know, the department has filed its most recent Raise the Age progress report on November 30th. And as I mentioned, Tyler Allen is here with me today. He is, they've been changing titles. So actually his new title is the High-End System of Care Director, as well as Lindy Boudreau, our new Adolescent Services Director. And they're here also to answer any questions you might have. Briefly, just to level set, I did want to say that in terms of progress, the report outlines several highlights, including that the Red Clover treatment program now has capacity for 3 residents, and there are 2 individuals residing there currently, and we're anticipating having a 3rd be admitted today. The permanent facility is also something we've been working on a great deal, the one that we propose to locate in Virgins. We've been discussing with our secure facilities stakeholders group the appropriate population and physical structure for the program. And we've also, along with BGS, been connecting with town officials to discuss a list of requirements that they have that they would like resolved or discussed in order to move forward with the program. And we're also in the midst of discussing and navigating zoning and permitting issues with them as well. Along with that, there does continue to be some challenges, though, with Raise the Age due to the compromised system of care and also workforce shortages and other issues that really underscore our position that the department really isn't in a position right now to support the final phase of implementation as of April 1st. It's really important that we have an environment from a systems and departmental standpoint and a legal standpoint that really would encourage a successful full implementation of the Act. And those are things that we are still working with internally.
Questions on this, Teresa?
I wasn't sure if Tyler and or Lindy are going to speak first, or should we hold questions, or?
Well, I can go either way, whatever works for their schedule.
Madam Chair, I'd suggest that Lindy and I were made available here to answer questions primarily. I think the majority of the updates here, but I think for the sake of time, it would, for the committee, if you have questions, we could really focus our answers to what's of interest to the committee.
Okay, Teresa.
Thank you. I've received some feedback. I thank you for mentioning the committee that's supposed to be providing input to the program development. And I'm going to refer to, I'm not going to refer to facility, I'm going to refer to program development because that's certainly what we are hoping that this is. The feedback that I received is actually not different from the feedback we got last year, which is people feel like they're only being, sort of announcements and updates about the high-end system of care, not really, they don't feel like it's an opportunity to provide genuine feedback. So, if a particular question is asked, they feel like it's more just about giving an update. So this is I guess, feedback for you that I've heard from different sources. So not the sort of same. They're like, I don't know how we, this is what I heard just this week. I don't know how we provide input when essentially we're just getting announcements from the staff about updates, announcements from DCF. So it's feedback that you might want to consider, your approach with the group and ask them for feedback about how they can actually give feedback before you folks have already made decisions. They feel like they're just sort of like hearing announcements about decisions you've already made instead of providing input into the decision-making process. That was just one thing. And then I probably should know the answer to this question, but I'm just sort of thinking ahead. Is this a facility that will be licensed by the Department of Disabilities, Aging and Independent Living?
No, it's not. It'll be licensed by our Residential Licensing and Special Investigations Unit. But
Okay.
also, I do appreciate that feedback and in terms of making sure that the program's stakeholders are having a meaningful opportunity to weigh in about uh, the program itself. And I wanted to ask Tyler to talk about the structure of the group in terms of we have the larger group and then there is a smaller group that's dedicated to discussing the program in terms of the structure and also what type of services will be included for the youth there. Because I believe they've been having some meetings along with the provider and also some of the other stakeholder members. And I thought they'd been having some pretty substantive conversations. So I'm hoping, Tyler, you could add some detail.
I'd love to speak to it. I really do appreciate the feedback I'm hearing. It does make me think of changing structure, maybe limiting what updates look like. I do think it is a responsibility of us to update that group on what our thinking is and where we're at. I would like to say last night or in the evening, afternoon to evening, we had a facility planning stakeholders group, and I don't know if this feedback was generated after that group or before. But my hope is that I think the tone of that meeting was a little bit different. We had very thoughtful, meaningful discussion specific to a question. And the question was, should we make an investment to design this facility with a set aside additional program that serves an 18 and older population specifically and exclusively? And some of that feedback came from this committee in conversations we've had. We went forth and made design adjustments to see how that could look, and we brought those design adjustments to the facility planning stakeholder group for their consideration. That's not reflective of a decision made by DCF that we need to have this. It was to have something in hand that they could consider in making a recommendation. And while they didn't have a concrete recommendation at the end of our meeting yesterday, we had a few smaller work groups of people who were invested in this particular question that got together to talk at it from all angles. And then that group brought some thinking to the larger group to digest. And while they didn't have a concrete yay or nay answer to it, it was, in my opinion, a thoughtful discussion looking at from multiple directions. And I think the majority of the group indicated that they have concern with building additional capacity and additional bed space up to 22 beds, which was the concept we proposed to them to do this. And there was also an expressed concern that it was too many eggs in one basket. You're trying to have one campus group of programs that serves all the needs, and maybe that's not appropriate. Maybe if there was capacity for future expansion, start with the original identified scope. If there's capacity for future expansion, that we could look into potentially a step down program or some sort of non-secured transitional program, or maybe as we understand what an 18 plus delinquency population looks like differently over time, there might be an identified need in the future. But at this stage, we probably should be paring back the scope of the project to what we had initially considered. So I think sometimes folks might think that this is DCF coming to the group with we've already made the decision. And in reality, what we're trying to do is give them an orientation of it could look this way or it could look this way. What would you like to see? What would you advise DCF to do? So I think we have some work to do to make sure that that's communicated clearly and folks feel like their feedback is a valued part of it. But I feel like we have been changing our orientation based on the impressions of those that are affected and impacted.
Thank you for that update. And I would just suggest maybe, because this is going to be an ongoing thing, because this is going to, we've still got a lot of work to do in this area, that, maybe even periodic intervals, you just ask the committee if they feel like the process is working for them. Specific, that specific question.
Thank you. Agreed. That makes a lot of sense.
Martin?
Yeah, so the report, it has multiple initiatives, multiple things that are being done to get ready for Raise the Age, but I really kind of want to understand though what the critical path is. And I can't imagine that every one of these things has to be in place to make this next step, particularly since on April 1st, it's not all of a sudden there's going to be 50 19-year-olds that go into the system. Presumably it will grow over the time. But so I'm really trying to understand, you know, what is the critical path? I mean, I can't imagine waiting around, for instance, for the DCF child welfare information system to be up and running sufficiently, which I can't imagine is going to be anytime soon. And waiting for the Green Mountain Youth Campus, is that really a necessity or is it staff? I just want to kind of understand that a little bit better as we're approaching this April 1st time.
Yeah, I mean, I'll start, and what you're looking for, I believe, is sort of a prioritization, right, of what's necessary to move forward. And you're right in terms of the CWIS, Child Welfare Information System. That's something that's going to be an ongoing initiative that we're still working with in terms of the RFP. I think that it's important for us to make sure if we do move forward and we have an influx of young people coming in, that we do have staff that are dedicated to handling that JS population, and that we are able to have make sure we have the relationship with BARGE such that they can take over some of the work in order to open up that type of work capacity for our family services workers. I know that's one thing that would be critical in order to be able to handle this next implementation of the phase. I would also like to ask Lindy Boudreau to weigh in as well.
Thank you, Erica. So for the record, Lindy Boudreau, I'm the Adolescent Services Director. How to get my title right. So just a weekend. So I just want to correct one thing. When this does go into effect, any youth who are 19 at the time of the offense who have not had a conviction in criminal division lose jurisdiction. So it could be that we inherit 50 cases, to use your example, Representative Lalonde, on April 1st. So I'm currently working with the judiciary on getting the data, updated data, so that as we move closer to that date, if that were to go into effect on April 1st, we would know what cases would automatically transfer to the family division. That's something that we did prior to the 18-year-olds going into effect in 2020. So we received that information on a county-wide basis and worked with the state's attorneys around those cases and being prepared for the transition from criminal division to family division. So right now, I don't know the number. My anticipation is that we will have that those new numbers to provide to the committee in the next report.
So just a follow-up question on that. So when you are looking at those, we'll just say 50 individuals, are you then apparently you're probably looking at the offenses that they're charged with and whether they would be in family court versus if it's a big 14 as we are calling it now. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay. So would we be able to see a breakdown as you're getting closer to what those individuals are charged with?
I can't answer that because I'm not exactly sure what the data looks like that the court's preparing for me. I'm assuming they're going to include those charges. They know that the ask to the judiciary is for those cases that would lose jurisdiction in criminal division. So I'm not sure if they're including the charges, but I can certainly ask them for that.
Right, and so just to be clear, I mean, some of the pushback that I've been hearing, or most of the pushback that I've been hearing about the Raise the Age initiative is a concern about youth who are involved in the drugs and gun trade. And I believe that the expansion of the Big 14 presumably is capturing those individuals and wouldn't go to family court. And I'm trying to truth check my understanding. And I'm not expecting you to have that answer right now, but I think that's something that we'll want to be looking at.
Well, I can share with you that we are seeing those cases in the family division. Those cases are being referred for youthful offender consideration. So I do know that we are working with those youth, at least for the initial phase of assessment on whether or not they're appropriate to be served in the juvenile system. Some may come through as youthful offenders and some may not.
But that's through the youthful offender, which is a little bit obviously different than if we're saying everything goes there under raise the age. Okay. I think that's a question, Diane.
Good morning. Thanks for being here. I have a two-part question. So we took a lot of testimony this year, still in this year, in Senate Judiciary in reference to raise the age. And ultimately, April 1 was the date that the majority of the individuals in our committee came up with. Now, when the deputy commissioner stated that they're not ready to implement the last phase of this program, my concern at the time was we shouldn't be implementing anything. In fact, we don't have the resources to provide to these individuals. So when you say you're not, the date will not change without legislative action, obviously. So if April 1 is the date that we're shooting for on the books, and you say there's going to be an adverse effect, could you tell us what that would be if in fact it does become law on April 1 and we realize you're stating that you're not quite ready to implement the entire process? And having said that, do you have a prediction on what date would be meaningful to you?
Well, who wants to answer that one?
Because that is a difficult one. I do believe if we were to implement it, the numbers are murky, but my real concern is that we would have more children, more youth than we're able to serve well because we don't have the infrastructure in terms of the workforce in place. And of course, there are all the other issues that we've talked about as well. I don't have a date in mind. I can't give you a date right now. I would need to talk more to Commissioner Winters and also my team to see how, projecting forward when we would have all those pieces together. Also, I do want to open that up to Tyler and Lindy as well in terms of what they would anticipate if we were to implement as of April 1st, what issues they would envision.
So I'll just say that again, it's hard right now without knowing the actual numbers of pending cases. That really does have an impact on what we're able to manage as of the April 1st date. So like I said, I believe the court sent that information to me yesterday. They were trying to make some tweaks to the information with the changing in their system. It's a little bit different. So I'm going to be reviewing that. So that will certainly help inform the impact. In addition to that, as Deputy Commissioner mentioned, the concern becomes not just taking on these cases, but also our current ability to serve all of the youth under DCF's purview related to justice-involved youth. That's why I mentioned the youthful offender cases. Although they're not raised the age, they certainly impact our staffing and our workload capability. So when we're looking at, or when I'm looking at the impact, I'm looking at the impact of all of the cases that we have to serve, not just the addition of the 19-year-olds. Tyler, would you have anything else to add?
I think the only other thing I would share onto that is when we consider high-end system of care residential placement, we need to appreciate the fact that an 18 and older population, unless you're talking about a secure placement environment, there is a legal difference there in that we cannot refer them into a treatment program. And actually, we don't have a treatment program to put we have in state a couple. We've talked about Return House. It's in the report. There's also the 208 program in Bennington that can serve that population. But we can't hold a young person to a treatment that they're not voluntarily part of. So there is a little bit of a substantive difference in that. We're trying to understand what the most effective level of placement programming would serve this population, knowing that it's a voluntary placement, and there aren't any out-of-state treatment programs that meet this need. So I'd just add that on as one of the factors.
So we have a couple committee questions. So Phil and then Jenny.
Thank you, Erica and Tyler and Lindy for being here. I have to say, as somebody on judiciary who's been through this discussion the last 3 years, this sounds very, very much like Groundhog Day to me, and honestly, not accidental Groundhog Day, but purposeful Groundhog Day. I asked 2 years ago and a year ago what the timeline would be if you wanted an extension, and was also given no clear timeline, no steps that had been taken to move us closer. So my working assumption, having heard your testimony again, is that the administration is committed not to putting this law in place, but to preventing it from coming into fruition. My problem with that are several, but one of them is that we had a very positive report on the early stage of Raise the Age, talking about how it had gone and what positive effects it had had. So I understand that there's anxiety about this next step in terms of workforce, in terms of, I think, a little bit of scaremongering about what might happen in terms of the drugs and gun trade. But when we extended it last year, we tried to make clear in Senate Judiciary, and that was while Senator Sears was with us, that we wanted very much to have that be understood as the last delay, and that the department would work toward implementing what is the law rather than preventing it from being implemented. And I feel as though we're at a kind of impasse, because the number one reason why this can't come into being is workforce, but we in the legislature don't hire the workforce or prioritize the workforce. So you can come back to us next year very easily. And honestly, Erica, when you say you can't give us a timeline, that suggests to me that next year we'll have the exact same answer. So I have to say my confidence in the implementation of this program is very near zero. And I think that's a shame. I think this is a program that has been proving itself to date. And it leaves us with an uncomfortable choice of trying in Senate Judiciary to work at cross purposes with the administration. And we never like to do that, but this is something that became law, and we've given 3 delays to honor your workforce requests, but it's beginning to seem that they're indefinite and ongoing, and that while this administration is in place, there's no real plan to implement this. And I'm happy to be convinced otherwise, but I think your testimony kind of speaks for itself. And there's no question mark there, so I'll just leave it at that.
Thank you, Phil. Ginny, you had your hand up and then took it down.
No, I think that Senator Bruce did a good job at asking for a timeline. I was going to be in the same place, in particular for programming, and as it relates to the judiciary and the needs in the judiciary for sequential intercept, and how those discussions are going. So I don't need to ask the question. I think that the concerns have been laid out. And with all due respect for the work that you're doing, I completely do understand how difficult this is. Nevertheless, it is statutory.
So I can't help but connect the dots, because I put on my building a facility hat. And in order to know how we move forward with a juvenile facility, we need to know who's being housed there. And when you talk about housing folks 18 and on, would be a different wing, would be a different building on the same acreage. And those decisions, the more you haven't decided what age you're gonna be implemented with Raise the Age, will impact the timeline for when that facility comes online and how it's designed. So the more delay, it's going to have a domino effect, possibly, on the new facility. And also with your provider, because it's not going to be state employees that will be staffing the facility. It will be contracted to a third party. Well, that's where my brain is going.
That point is well taken, and it's sort of a function of making sure that we are listening to the additional voices that has sort of slowed the process down, sort of the way Tyler was discussing, and trying to make sure we are inclusive in what we want to do. But with that smaller group of the facilities, secure facilities working group, coming up with their opinions, it is time now for us to sort of decide which way we're going to go. I don't anticipate we're going to continue sort of going around and around in a circle, since we have received some input from that smaller group that they put out to the larger stakeholders group. So I do believe we're going to be moving forward with, making that decision in terms of, who, and then that means, like you're saying, the whole domino effect of then the size of the facility once we figure out who is going to be in the facility, at least at this first phase of the Green Mountain Youth Campus. So I don't think we're going to continue to tread water on that path, because it's critical that we get this moving, not for us, as well as for the workforce.
And the other piece to this facility, it's not the state that is going to go out and build the facility. We are contracting out with a developer that will design and build this facility on our behalf, and we will be paying rent. So the longer we extend not having a decision could jeopardize the partnership that we currently have with the design company. Because it's not BGS, and it's not the state, and it's not the capital bill that is building this facility. It's a private developer. And we're contracting with that private developer, and we're building, the plan is to build the facility on state-owned property. But we'll be leasing back. We will be leasing this facility. We will not be owning it. So I just want to put that on the table, because that's a little wrinkle here. Teresa?
This is obviously something that we're going to be continuing to follow as the session gets started, right at the beginning of the session. And so just, I guess, putting that out there for you folks to be prepared about that. And thank you for the reminder that it's not going to be done through the capital bill, that it's going to be a lease facility. I also think that we need to at least understand directly from the folks around this advisory committee that DCF has been utilizing, that Tyler reported that they came to just yesterday, I guess not a formal recommendation, but a consensus that they should concentrate on the initial phase, which did not include space for these folks. And so I think I guess what I'm saying is there's a number of variables for us to consider. I don't have any, particular conclusion to that, but I think we need to also keep an open mind to the feedback that we are getting from the folks in the field who are providing feedback to the department. But of course, we want to hear from them directly.
And I think you raise a good point in that if you just go ahead and design and build for the folks prior to raising age, and that's the negotiations that the state is having with the city of Virgins. What then happens if we do need space for the 18-year-olds plus or 19-year-old plus? what then happens with those negotiations that are ongoing with the city of Virgins. And I know DCF and I know BGS is in negotiations with the city of Virgins right now. The city of Virgins has asked for a package based on whatever information has been given to them by the state, by BGS and DCF in terms of what the number of beds and ages would be housed there. And are they aware that there may be the possibility of 19-year-olds or 18-year-olds up? Because that could change the dynamics for that community.
Yes, they are aware. There was a meeting online to discuss that, the changes that are being contemplated and that aren't, necessarily set in stone. And a lot of the things on their list aren't necessarily tied to the size of the building. They have a lot of requests. Some are doable, some are not. I know that Tyler was able to attend that meeting. I'm wondering if you could weigh in a bit on what you heard.
I can, and I apologize. I'm going to have to step away shortly, but they do understand that is out there, that's been part of the discussion. That was some of the consideration that also came back from the community to the facility planning stakeholders working group as we kind of contemplated what is the scope of this overall project. So the fact that we want to be good neighbors and good partners to the community that we're going to establish a facility, we need to be able to be transparent with them of our intentions. And so while we had designed, put forth this design with a what could it look like, we wanted to make sure the community understood that a decision hadn't been made without the consideration of how that impacts them. And so that was much of what we talked about in that meeting, so that they do understand that this isn't a finalized thing. And also the facility planning stakeholders group recognizes that community's wishes are, and the facility planning stakeholders group always pushes DCF to make sure that we are very considerate of the community's input as well. So it's known all along, and as I said, that the general sense of consensus that we're approaching is that expanding the scope of this project has a lot of challenges associated with it. And we're asking to do too much with it, and there's a wisdom to the original intent.
And to be clear, this package that the city of Virgins has put on the table is not decided by DCF or BGS. It is decided by the fifth floor. And there may need to be some legislation or not to carry out that agreement or that package. So that's another layer here that's out of your hands completely. It's the fifth floor that will make that ultimate decision for that package. Jenny?
Quick question on, and Tyler, maybe you can answer this. The sort of the requests that Virgins has made, to what extent do they go beyond the facility itself and into other areas of the city? I mean, are they asking for infrastructure improvements outside of the facility or related?
Yeah, to my understanding about those, and I'm only part of that conversation. Their requests are considering impact to community, and their requests for how we can have a partnership extend beyond just the facility itself. But I think that the work group within the community has put some rational thought together on how they see it all related to the facility, but we're really not just talking about the facility grounds. We're talking around this the surrounding space, what capacity is, what expansion is. They're trying to factor it into their planning moving forward. How do they want to plan around the development of their city, a bigger picture, and how does this fit into it? So I don't think I could draw the line of where that is.
I could draw a whole lot of connections, I think, that would perhaps not fit. So that's I do have a concern about that. And so my other question, and I guess this goes for folks on institutions or, Alice, in your committee, obviously, well, this is going through a contract. It's not going through, bonding, so it doesn't go through the capital bill. And nevertheless, do we have criteria that determine how and when, benefits are given to a community when they support state services, and vice versa, any demands that the state would make on a community, when those things happen? Or so this, for me, this is a huge question. It's not just about Virgins, it's about every other community that has state services. And we did get into that discussion a little bit in the Senate last year. I am concerned that the more you give on these things, then the more demands are made going forward. So what criteria do we have in place that allow for decision making, so that it's about the facility and it's not about the bridge across town? So those are the kinds of things I'm thinking about.
Well, there are no guidelines for that. And again, those are the negotiations that occur with leadership in DCF, leadership in BGS, and the fifth floor. It is the fifth floor that will ultimately make those decisions. That's what I have experienced in the past. I'm assuming that's the way it will go forward. And this may be, and I hate to do this, Sabrina, but it may be a good transition to bring BGS up to the table, because BGS is really more in the driver's seat when it becomes talking about the property and the building and the contract. And again, it's not the commissioners of DCF and BGS who are going to make those ultimate decisions. They're going to relay what Virgins has asked for to the fifth floor. And the fifth floor will make those ultimate decisions. That's my understanding. That's how it's played out in the past. And I'm assuming that's how it goes forward. Now, I may be wrong. And please.
And we have to appropriate resources, Madam Chair?
Sometimes we do. Sometimes we do. We've had to do that in the past. Other times there may be things
May or may not.
that may not need legislative initiatives or finances.
Madam Chair,
Yes, Bill.
if I might, I hear what you're saying. I agree to a certain extent, but if we think about, we're talking about several issues and how they interconnect. So if the fifth floor makes a decision with Virgins that reverse engineers an approach to raise the age, which is already in statute, I feel like we're in a world where we're saying that the negotiations in Virgins ultimately require the delay of raise the age. That is, pardon my French, bass-ackwards, and it should be that current law helps to determine what we are negotiating with Virgins. So if we need space for the 19-year-olds, that should, and I was glad to hear Erica say that that has been part of the discussion with Virgins. That should be part of what we're actively negotiating to get, not using it as a reason why we need to delay raise the age.
And that's a terrific point. And I think that's what our standing committees, we're going to be back here, 3 weeks? That's what our standing committees really need to focus in on. And that's why I like to always bring the building aspect to the table, because the building will determine what your policy is. And we're really at the beginning here in terms of figuring out what the building is going to be. But to your point, Phil, it's also this sideline of the package and what is being negotiated and how does that impact the initiative of raise the age and meeting the deadline. Deputy Commissioner?
Oh, hi. I know that Lindy and Tyler have a hard deadline and they need to go. So I know we're still in the middle of a conversation, but I'm hoping they can be released.
Yes.
And we can always
Yes,
pick
they
up
can.
another time.
Yes. Yes, I'm sure we're going to continue this conversation come January. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, committee.
Thank you.
And I do want to connect with Sabrina, and I know for state employees, if we could finish with Steve by 12 o'clock or 11:45, does that work for him?
I can tell you, Madam Chair, that he said he's waiting to be admitted to the Zoom at the moment, so he could probably answer that better, more.
Okay, he can be admitted. I want to finish up with Sabrina and then we'll switch to Steve. If we have to go to 12:15 with the remainder, with Vince and the remainder of it, we can do that, but I want to make sure that Steve gets on.
Yes.
Okay. Sabrina, welcome. Sabrina's with Department of Buildings and General Services. And if you could give us a really quick, brief summary of where you are with this project and with the development.
Sure. Sabrina Parish, Project Manager with Buildings and General Services. So we are in the permitting and the design phase. We are treading water right now, not from the raise the age decision, but from the zoning decision. We were expecting to hear from the town in the fall. We did not. So we are about 3 months behind. We have about 8 months of permitting. Once that zoning decision is made, we cannot start that process until we have the zoning. So that will push our schedule back a little bit. We are in negotiations with the town. Commissioner Manoli will need to speak about that. And just to assure you, we do have a conceptual design for the raise the age population, as well as a design without that population.
So you have both, with and without?
Yes.
And what is the timeline for Virgins? Virgins would need to change the zoning.
Correct.
Are they looking to a vote to do this, or are they just doing it internally?
It looks like the rules are very vague around the process. They are looking at a vote, but that vote is non-binding.
Okay. And would that vote be a town meeting?
I believe so. I believe that's their plan.
And is that contingent on knowing what the package that they have asked for, how that results? Is that?
We have informed them that we would not have a decision on the package by town meeting.
So you're in the design and permitting,
Yes,
and you can't begin permitting until you know what the zoning is.
correct.
And once you begin permitting, it's an 8-month timeframe.
Provided there are no unforeseen issues.
That brings it to the end of next year, before you even get through the permitting. And are you in schematic design?
We are in schematic design.
So for the committee, what schematic design is preliminary design that just kind of gives you the options of what's out there and the cost. Questions?
Well, it's become circular and going to what programming is going to be embedded in the facilities. So I do see that form and function go along very closely. So the question is, how does the programming relate to the design that you have in place?
Yeah, we are at the point where we need, not only do we need the zoning decision, but we also need the decision on the program.
When you don't have that, BGS can't move forward.
So, and I realize this is, I realize I have a bias, so I'm just stating that, for the whoever's listening. So when I hear campus, it causes me concern, I'll be honest. And part of what runs through my head is thinking about keeping this facility for the sort of, I guess what I would say, original intended purpose, and thinking about a different location, frankly, for a 18 and 19-year-old program. And I'm just putting that out on the table because part of that enables, we're not making the decision here, but I'm just, I feel like I'm holding this back, and it is something that I will bring up, when we have testimony in our committee about this, because as folks heard, back when we first started talking about this in this committee earlier this year, we were met with blank faces when we started talking about the older youth and separation, within a facility, and having, there didn't seem to have been planning about that. And I still do believe that the programming for the 18 and 19-year-olds would be substantially different than the programming for the younger youth. And having, closed a campus, not, 20 miles away from Virgins in Brandon, and thinking about campus and rebuilding campus, it gives me pause. I'm just saying that out loud to my fellow legislators and the public, that, on a level that thinks about, what may or may not be best, and what might be more palatable to this community as well, and thinking about, potential other locations for a program that would serve the older youth. So I'm just putting that out there on the table.
Folks?
Like, I don't know if the department had thought about a different location or a different program location for the older youth, or got all their eggs in one potential basket or not. Since I know we have a temporary program, the Red Clover program that we heard about in Middlesex.
I have to say, we have not necessarily thought about a separate location, but as you know, everything is still, nothing is solid yet. We had thought of perhaps having the location go as originally planned, and if there's space permitting, maybe then having another wing built on at another time. But that idea of actually using just a separate location is not something that I would consider off the table at all. I like that idea as well.
So if it was a separate location, in terms of the way it works in the building community, you have now delayed it at least another 1.5 to 2 years.
Right.
Because you have to work with another community. And the question is, do you do it as state-owned property, or do you have to purchase property? So you're starting the process all over again. I'm just putting that on the tape. Because right now you had construction would start in 25. There's no way construction's going to start in 25. Construction's not going to start until maybe 26. Sorry.
So is it my understanding, though, that this location, that the programming for 18 and 19-year-olds and where they would be located, that they would be separate?
Yeah, so this facility includes, we're basically using a small house concept that kind of came from the VA. So each program is a separate small house with a larger shared space, classrooms, gymnasium, low technical space, administration.
And I guess another question for Deputy Radke is that when this facility opens, can the current Middlesex location, is that where the other location is right now? Could that be used for the 18, 19-year-olds in term?
I think it might be possible, but I know that Middlesex location is very old, and I thought that they had been planning on retiring it, but now that we've put investments in it and hardened it, I think that's something we would have to look to our BGS team to say whether they felt that could be likely.
They were modulars.
Right.
That we set up.
I visited.
Yeah, all different and different forms. I want to move this along because I'm worried about Steve and the SCA. Did you have anything else, Sabrina? So I think it's going to be really important when the session starts that the respective committees really work cohesively and coordinate with this, because a lot of folks sometimes focus in on programming, and programming is in the driver's seat, but BGS also is part of this picture in terms of the building and negotiating with the developer and negotiating with the city of Virgins. So the respective legislative committees need to work together with DCF and BGS as well as the fifth floor. on this. I think it's gonna be really important that we coordinate.
So, yeah, well, talk about that.
Yeah, we can talk about that. Anything else? Great. Thank you, Sabrina. And
Thank you for your time and
Yes.
your feedback.
We'll be seeing you in a few weeks. Thank you. Let's do a quick shift and we have Steve Howard with us, and I know Steve has a commitment later on this afternoon that he needs to get to, but we put out a challenge to both the SEA as well as DOC to come back to us in December with some brainstorming ideas in terms of how to address the recruitment and retention issue of the staffing of our facilities and field offices as well. So Steve, welcome. I'm sorry we're a little 15 minutes late, but better late than. And
no problem. Well, thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity to testify. My name is Steve Howard. I'm the Executive Director of the Vermont State Employees Association. And Madam Chair, what I want to do, I do have some results of our unit leadership's brainstorming around the challenges facing the Department of Corrections in relation to staffing and the staffing crisis. I do want to sort of set the table a little bit, just to make sure it's just very clear what our role is. So it's our view that it's the Scott administration's job to run the Department of Corrections properly. It's the legislature's job to make sure they do run it properly. And it's the VSEA's job to make sure that our members' voices are heard from the front lines in that department, and to tell you when we think it's not being run properly. So that is what we have been trying to do. But we want to make it clear that VSEA, while we have put some ideas on the table, we have done that with the management. We've tried to do that with the governor directly at times and with the legislature. VSEA does not run the Department of Corrections. That is not our job. It is, in fact, the governor's job to run the Department of Corrections. So I just want to start by before I go into the brainstorming of some solutions, I want to set the table a little bit in terms of what the problem is today. We all know that there is a pervasive staffing crisis, but I have some numbers that I want to share with you because we've been talking to the legislature, about 5 or 6 years ago. We started to come to the legislature to say there is a growing staffing crisis that needs to be addressed. We are still in the midst of that crisis, and it's getting deeper and worse. And I just want to give you some data before I go through the ideas that our members have put together. I have to say that we, over those 5 years, have made progress from time to time by entering at the bargaining table into side letters of agreement with the administration. They have started to show promise, started to show progress, and those agreements have been yanked by the administration. And so we are going to repeat some of what we saw as successful in that process, because we think the history shows that those efforts did bear fruit and could help us impact this in a positive way. But I just want to give you some data from March 2024 to November 2024, which is the latest data that we could get from the Department of Human Resources. The total number of vacancies among COs has doubled from 40 to 81 during that time, a massive growth in the number of vacancies. And I want to tell you about a couple of particular facilities where it is very pronounced. So in the chair's district at Southern State Correctional Facility, they have a 41% vacancy rate. 41% vacancy rate, an increase of 256% since March. At the women's facility, the rate has nearly doubled from 16% to 29%. And that is, other facilities are not far off from those two facilities that seem to have the most pronounced growth in vacancies that are resulting in our members working 16-hour shift after 16-hour shift after 16-hour shift. They are exhausted, they are burnt out, and they are fed up. So it's gotten so bad that our our field department has now counted up to 6 calls, we know there are more, of members who have called us to report that they haven't gotten bathroom breaks. And during that time, they obviously had to change their uniforms. We have received phone calls from members increasingly telling us that they're falling asleep on their way home after a 16-hour shift. The other day, I received a call from a wife of a CO who called to tell me that she calls her husband when he leaves the facility to talk to him so that he doesn't fall asleep on his hour commute home. And on this particular day, when she called, he fell asleep while she was talking to him on the phone and drove off the side of the road. So I'm really not supposed to say that the sky is falling. I've been told not to do that. I will leave it up to you to decide whether the sky is falling. I personally, as a Vermonter and a taxpayer, find this unconscionable and unacceptable. And so I'm sure that many people in the room share that view. So what do we do about it? We have some ideas. And I just want to start by saying the VSEA is not asking the legislature to get involved in collective bargaining. We do not want the legislature involved in collective bargaining. And we are not asking the legislature for any of these things to take any actions on anything that would be bargainable. But the fact remains that the number one solution to this problem is for the governor to come to the table and to bargain with the members of the VSEA to increase the pay and the benefits of the folks who are working on the front lines in security positions in corrections, and to incentivize other folks in corrections to help cover the overtime. So we know double time on days off was very effective. We know incentives to the field are very effective. We know that in this economic circumstance Vermont is in, despite the great work of the legislature on the child care bill, that we are ways off from having available and affordable child care. Providing child care would be, in this instance, a huge incentive for more people to come work for the Department of Corrections just for that benefit, which they can't find anywhere else, and to help these 24/7 facilities keep the staff that they have, many of whom are single parents. Probably the most incompatible work schedule of any parent, much less a single parent, but we have many single parents who are working on the front lines in corrections. Secondly, and you've heard those folks on probably in this committee and on the committees of jurisdiction have heard me say this before, our members believe that the managers who are working in central office, who were trained at taxpayers' expense to work in a facility or in the field, need in this emergency to be assigned to the facilities and to the field to relieve the pressure on the frontline workers. Now, we know that's a managerial decision, but we also know that you're all very powerful, persuasive, and influential Vermonters. And we are asking you to bring this to the commissioner and to use whatever pressure, influence, and persuasion you can to make this a reality. There is a giant disconnect between central office management and the frontline workers. This would be a major step forward in alleviating the pressure in the crisis, but also building a bond that does not exist now between the managers in central office and the folks on the front lines working the 16-hour shifts, sitting in hospitals, away from their family and away from their lives. The legislature could take action in the next General Assembly to align Group G, which is the 20-year, the retirement at age 55, the plan that the VSEA successfully fought for in the last round of negotiations and legislating around the pension. You could align Group G with Group C, which is what the state police have and what sworn law enforcement officers have. That would reduce the contribution rates. It would also allow for a 20-year retirement at age 50 rather than a 20-year retirement at age 55. That is something the legislature could do. It's not bargainable. It's all driven by statute, and it's in the purview of the legislature. One of the things that came out very clearly from our members in the September statewide labor management meeting we had with the commissioner and his management team, and in discussions with the members preparing for this meeting, is we have to tell people the truth. There is no work-life balance currently in the Department of Corrections. And while the goals of the new schedule the commissioner put out, the 223 schedule, are admirable and goals that we support, we are not there yet. So when you tell people they're going to have a work-life balance, and you tell them they're going to be paid what they were paid under the previous side letter that expired, and they both don't get the work-life balance and they don't get what they were told when they were hired, they leave. And they are leaving in large numbers because they feel like they were not being told the truth. There was a lot of talk in the last meeting from the commissioner about the 223 schedule in the state of Texas. And I talked to our members about it. And they said, yeah, it's great that Texas has the 223 schedule in their correction system, but they have a completely different system for supervision. They have an indirect system of supervision, which is very different from the very labor-intensive system that we use in the Vermont correctional system. So it's sort of deceiving to say that those are apples and apples. It's apples and oranges, and maybe the department wants to consider a less labor-intensive indirect supervision model the way they are working in Texas. Our members also believe that in the 12 and 16 hours that they are working in these facilities day after day, that there should be some rotation out of the most demanding units. So for instance, the mental health unit, which is at Springfield, it's a very demanding assignment. So staying there for 16 hours takes a toll on people, and they suggest some rotation that would alleviate the pressure on those frontline workers. They're looking also at ways to close units. And one suggestion they have, and I don't know if we fully thought it out and may have to be balanced with the public's demand for increased accountability. But one suggestion from a member in this discussion was that there be an audit of what they call the interrupts, or the folks who are in jail because they violated their furlough. That might be a place where we could alleviate some of the demand and close some units in order to bring down pressure on staff. Now, that also has to be balanced with the fact that that increases pressure on the field, and it also may not meet the public's demand for accountability when it comes to folks who have committed crime. I think there's a number of other things that are maybe less obvious to the legislature that the legislature could do. And incidentally, from our members' perspective, there is no other issue as critical as this issue currently in the Department of Corrections. There's no other issue that is as important as this issue, solving the staffing crisis. And it requires the attention of both the committees of jurisdiction on corrections and the committees on government operations. And that's because we have to make sure there's no policy issue that's more impactful on the goals of the state in terms of criminal justice reform, in terms of accountability for the public, than the staffing crisis we currently face. And it requires all hands on deck. Reviewing exit interviews to see why people said they were leaving. Mostly, I will tell you, it's because of the lack of work-life balance. That's mostly why people are leaving. We would call on the legislative committees to hold at least 8 hours a week of testimony on this issue so that the commissioner feels the pressure to act every single week until this problem is solved. And he knows, and the governor knows, that the legislators are coming with questions about what was done last week to solve this crisis, what's going to be done next week to solve this crisis. It has to move to the front of the burner. It has to be treated like the urgent matter that it is. And I think our members would just ask, just in light of the power and the influence that you have, that you stand solidly with the workers in this crisis, that you believe them when they testify about what they're facing. And we have had, many, many members come on their days off, their precious days off, to plead for help with the governor, with the commissioner, with the legislature, with the public. So we ask you to stand solidly on their side. And there are some small things that you could do. You could ask for a meeting with the governor, and you could ask the governor what his plan is to address these growing vacancies in the Department of Corrections. I'm sure he would be willing to meet with you. You could help us get the family members of the Department of Corrections employees in front of the governor On December 23rd, we're very excited. We are bringing for the first time the spouses and the children of our members in the Department of Corrections to meet with the Secretary of Administration, Sarah Clark, who we have a great deal of respect for and who we really like, to really tell her what the impact on their family has been of the 16-hour shifts and the impact on their loved one has been on the pressure that is building on them personally from the stress of this unbelievable amount of overtime that they're being asked to work. You know, I don't know, the governor, when he ran for lieutenant governor, he did a lot of those on the job sort of moments where he did work. Maybe he could visit a correctional facility. Maybe he could work a 16-hour shift and see what it's like. Maybe that would be helpful for him to understand the gravity of the situation that we're in. I think mostly what our members would ask you to do is to not be neutral, to not be silent, to be vocal, to be aggressive, to stand with us. And we don't know that any of that's going to work, but it's better to have more people pulling in the same direction than not. And I think finally, we've demanded a second statewide labor management meeting with the commissioner. We had one in September. Our members have asked for a follow-up one to see what the commissioner's plan is. And we're hopeful that he will come with specific recommendations today and specific recommendations when we finally get that meeting. And maybe you could encourage him to get that meeting scheduled so that he can hear from 12 leading correctional staff from across the state. He can look them in their eyes and see what they're going through, but also communicate with them what his plan as their leader is to solve this problem. And I really appreciate this opportunity, and I'm going to be leaving here to travel to Southern State to sit with our members in a labor management meeting with the leadership team, the management team of that facility. And as I said earlier, with a 41% vacancy rate, I know that I'm going to be there at a time when all of us are preparing for the holidays and it's a festive season. But I will walk out of there knowing that our members probably aren't going to have the same holiday that you and I are going to have, because they're going to be working a 16-hour shift in a seriously, dangerously understaffed facility. I really thank you for the opportunity to testify. I appreciate your accommodating my schedule, and I'm happy to take any questions that you might have.
Thank you, Steve. And I've written down some of the recommends that I'm interpreting these as recommends, and I'm just going to list them. Increase in pay and benefits, increase in childcare opportunities, putting managers from central office on the front lines, align Group G with that of Group C, which would take legislative initiative. Rotations during shifts, particularly for folks who are working in the mental health unit, for them to shift out of there during part of their scheduled shift.
Mm-hmm.
Looking at folks who have violated conditions of furlough, do they really need to be incarcerated? If we could bring down the number of folks who are incarcerated, could we close a unit? A strategy or a process in terms of who and how we review exit interviews. Those are some of the things that I've heard. I do have a question in terms of those that need legislative work and statute change, particularly aligning Group G with Group C. Have you been working with folks to submit a draft request to introduce legislation to do that?
Yes, and in fact, and Tom Abdelnour is there in the room, and he can correct me. I believe last year, Representative Morris from Springfield introduced the bill, and I believe Representative Wachowski, maybe I'm wrong about that, in the Senate introduced the bill, and we'll be seeking asking them to do that again. And maybe I may have the senator wrong, but
That's correct. Steve, yes, please.
That's correct. Okay,
Right.
so we'll be asking them to do that again.
And I would also think your pay and benefits are connected to the classification levels of CO1s and CO2s that may need to be changed. So that may need also legislation and a bill draft to do that.
I don't know if it's as much about classification, and we have just gone through the period, but we'll start again this summer of reclassifications and what class action reclassifications. I think it's more about getting to the table to discuss an additional side letter. And we're not asking the legislature to get involved in any of that bargaining. We're not asking the legislature to do that at all. But we are asking to use your power and your influence and your persuasion to get the governor to do that.
Questions?
I have one quick question. Good morning, Steve. I just have one question in reference to the feedback from the corrections staff. Maybe you can expound upon the Springfield facility where it states the minute you took away overtime after 8 hours, everyone was walking out on that. How can the state take away overtime after 8 hours? Isn't that an FLSA standard?
So no, in the last collective bargaining agreement, the most controversial piece of that agreement, which was a proposal by the administration, accepted by the VSEA as part of that whole package, the overtime class changed from 8 hours in a day and 40 hours in a week to 12 hours in a day and 60 hours in a week. And while there was an $11 million additional investment in salary and wages for the unit, that is, I would say, fair to say, a controversial change. And that has caused a lot of people to, look elsewhere, mostly because a 12-hour shift is really a 16-hour shift. And one of the things I just want to point out that our members also wanted me to say is when you look at mandatory overtime versus voluntary overtime, you can't really trust the numbers there, because what our members will do when they know the staffing levels, they know the holes in the schedule, they will volunteer for the overtime so that they can choose their post. So otherwise they would be mandated and they wouldn't get to choose their post. So when someone says, well, the mandatory overtime is not as big as it really, what Steve says or what VSEA says, mostly it's because our members are choosing to work the overtime. So because they know they're going to be mandated and they want to choose their post.
So speaking of overtime, Steve, have members weighed in at all thinking if someone is, and people are working overtime, but that overtime could be calculated towards their retirement?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear the last part of that, Madam Chair.
So they're working overtime. Has there been any discussion with your members in terms of looking into proposing or supporting if when they're working overtime, that overtime could get calculated towards their retirement?
You mean towards their service credit?
Yes.
It has come up. And I think it is, I think it is an issue that I think has some support. One thing that we have introduced legislation in the past, and we will be doing it again this year. In fact, we'll be trying to work with the treasurer to find the money for the experience studies to at least exempt from the anti-spiking law that we support. We don't want people spiking their pensions, but to at least exempt from that calculation mandatory overtime. Although it won't be a true reflection of all of the overtime that members work, we do believe that when there is mandatory overtime, you shouldn't be punished in your retirement because you answered the call either during COVID or during a staffing crisis.
Questions? Statements from the committee? Tom, do you want to weigh in at all while you're here?
I'm sure I appreciate the opportunity, but I think Steve has summarized the state of affairs very well and very succinctly and finally presented that.
Anything else, Steve?
No, I think I'll leave it at that, and I wish you all a Merry Christmas and Happy Holiday.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Bless you. Let me get back here. So is Vince gonna be able to come in or not
My understanding, Madam Chair, is that Steve is our witness on this.
on this as well? Okay, I'm sorry about that. So Steve, this is staffing issues, dealing more with the state's attorneys and sheriffs, and we do have Tim Dumont here. Do we turn it over to you first, Steve, for this? Is that, or Tom? What's the thinking here?
Madam Chair, I appreciate, I'm glad you mentioned that. I'm sorry, I forgot, I neglected to do that housekeeping at the beginning of my testimony. I believe we do wish to speak to the committees of jurisdiction about the chronic understaffing in the Department of State's Attorneys and Sheriffs and the impact it has on public safety. But I understand that the department hasn't been able to get all the data that they needed. It's taken longer than they thought. And so we would ask that we delay that testimony until the session before the committees of jurisdiction. But I think but I would just ask you to be aware of the fact that one component that is being, I think, overlooked in the whole chain of how we keep the public safe is the resources that our prosecutors, deputy state's attorneys, victim advocates, and the admin in those offices have, in particular in light of the judiciary's backlog, because work is shifting now from the judiciary as they catch up over to our members in the department, and they're having a harder and harder time keeping up. But we don't have anything to testify about today, but we do hope that we'll have an opportunity during the session.
Oh, noted. I do want to offer, Tim is here for the Department of State's Attorneys and Sheriffs. Is there anything you want to weigh in on while you're here, Tim?
Yeah, just very briefly.
Just identify yourself for the record.
Department of State's Attorneys and Sheriffs. Just briefly, Steve outlined, right, it's not just deputy state's attorneys, and we always need more deputy state's attorneys. Admins, victim advocates last year had an average caseload of about 600 cases. The admins, that's the flow of information through law enforcement, through judiciary, assisting the attorneys, some real intense needs. And we're looking forward to chatting with the committees of jurisdiction on that and working with the FCA on the numbers. Right now, we get a data extraction of all the pending cases in March and December from the judiciary, and you're looking at the IT data staff essentially on this issue, which it wasn't in my job description, but I'm getting used to it. Ian Sullivan from Rutland is also really been our lead on data. He and I are talking this week and presenting preliminary results to state's attorneys next week and the end of this week, and then after that point, we'll be able to have a little bit more public-facing data. But you're right, we're still dealing with a tremendous backlog of cases, and the issues remain at the forefront.
So there's been 5 new judges that have been appointed. Is that going to be putting more pressure on your department as well? On the state's attorneys?
The system is a 3-pronged stool. You need to make sure all 3 legs are appropriately resourced.
Anything from the committee?
I would just note that, there's 4 judges, but
Okay.
they're not on board right now working. So they're not ready. There'll be additional issues when they come.
When they come on board. When are they due to come on board at the beginning of the year?
Yes, they'll probably
They
be
were just
sworn in the
appointed.
next couple of weeks.
Yeah, they were just.
They'll be sworn in before the session starts.
So that may have implications for budget adjustment?
No, that money was in the
Not,
budget.
not,
It's in the
not for
budget.
judicial.
Anything else for Steve or Tim or Tom? Thank you, Steve. Thank you for taking the time. Appreciate it. That's it for this morning for the committee. So we will take a lunch break and be back at